Breakdown. It is Thursday, October 10th, 2019. I'm Dave Lockren. That right there is Sal Vetri. We've got a 10-game slate to break down for you. Sal, what's going on, man?
What's up, Lovey? Yeah, 10 game slate. We get a couple games off. It feels like a vacation when you're doing content when you get a couple games less, right? But I'm excited to get into it. I saw a peek at the ownership for the first time last night, and a couple things surprised me. So it'll be interesting to break it down.
Yeah, and Chris Baggs and I broke down early ownership look yesterday on the strategy show. That was Wednesday, so check it out. All of that on our homepage at youtube.com/awesemo. Sal, you and I took a first look at salaries on Tuesday, and Manny, Laura, and I broke down everything from week 5 on Monday. So if you got some time, check all of them out. We run this Monday through Saturday. Manny, Laura, and Chris Randone will be with you tomorrow with lineup construction. And then you will close it out with, I believe, Randone to get us headed into Sunday.
Yep, that's right.
Beautiful. All right, let's jump into it. Before we do, should let you know that Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports is the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. And they've got some monster contests again this week. The $300,000 NFL baller guaranteed $30,000 to first place. Still a long way to go before that's filled. So you might see some overlay there as well. Of course, some no entry fee contest where everything that you pay into it is paid back out to the player. A couple other contests I noticed too, like the 4K to first $7, 20K guaranteed. Some really solid ones. And if you're working with a smaller bankroll, there's the 20K $1 entry guaranteed contest, 2K to first. You can get into all of these by signing up through us at awesemo.com. Get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, YSRPs, to be used on the site. Virtually the same as cash if you're using them at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. You can use it to play, win, and then withdraw that money in the event that you do so win. But yeah, go over to awesemo.com and check out the NFL column or the NFL tab. You'll see the articles at the top. It's free. Any primetime article will have the Yahoo link. Anything by EMAC will have the Yahoo link right there at the top. And Brett, our social media guy, is likely going to drop the link right in this YouTube chat for all of you to see and click on it. So check it out. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the Deeper Dive. And thank you, Ryan, because Sal, I have you listed as Chris Spags.
Oh, and the name thing?
Oh, look at that. There you are. Sal Vetri, you're back. All right, man, let's jump right into it. We've got 10 games and a first one on the docket, Cincinnati and Baltimore. Dude, this Baltimore team has been really bad defensively. I mean, I think they were overhyped from the beginning, but now it's just like way worse. Tony Jefferson is now done for the season. Harbaugh talked about Jimmy Smith yesterday, and it sure didn't sound like he was ready for him to return this week, maybe next week, but it doesn't appear that he'll be back this week either. So they've been dealt another blow in that secondary. They've been destroyed in the slot this season. Let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. Andy Dalton, Tyler Boyd, who is 6th in slot yards in the league this year. The Ravens, as I've mentioned, have given up tons of yards in the slots to guys like Fitzgerald and Kirk, and really anyone who has played them recently. Sammy Watkins, McCall Hardman, Jarvis, Landry at 156 in the slot the other day. It's an interesting spot, but I think another layer here to let you work off of and get your take. The pass rush for Baltimore, according to Pro Football Focus, ranks towards the bottom of the league. And I think that actually, no, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. I had it backwards. Yeah, they rank 31st ahead of only the Dolphins. So this does on paper set up as a very good matchup for the Cincinnati Bengals offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's slowly starting to be known that just due to injuries and people leaving in free agency, you see Zadarius Smith on the Packers now, former Raven, that this defense just isn't good. And what you have out there is Marlon Humphrey, and for the most part, that's about it. So just sticking with Cincinnati, injury-wise, Alec Erickson is in the concussion protocol, a depth receiver for the most part. But Andre Smith, left tackle, he left last week with an ankle injury, so we know how bad this line's already been. He's not good, but, I mean, if you're going to be losing him and filling in a third-string left tackle, it gets pretty bad. So we have to monitor that. Tyler Boyd, I think, is the one that stands out the most here. Like you said, we talked on Tuesday about just the struggles that the Ravens have had defending slot wide receivers, and it was to be expected, losing their number one slot cornerback before the season started. We've had just 200-yard games from the Cardinals receivers. Juju went for 775 and a touchdown last week. Jarvis Landry had a career game against them. And now you have Tyler Boyd, a guy who comes in for this slate being the third highest in targets per game. Like, he's getting the same volume, only behind Cooper Kupp and Michael Thomas. So that's the type of company that he's in so far this year, really taking another leap forward after having a fantastic start last year. He's doing it all without AJ Green, of course. So the only concern that I see is you're not seeing much usage around the red zone for him, only 2 red zone targets, but that's due to regress, I would imagine, even with Tate being there now and taking up a ton of red zone looks. So Tyler Boyd's the main priority here. Auden Tate, the concern is that if he goes on the outside, you get some Marlon Humphreys for him. It wouldn't be a primary shadow matchup or anything. But Tate did play 100% of the snaps last week, and he's really securing himself as sort of the red zone target now. And what I think you get there is just a complete non-usage, really, of Tyler Eifert. Now Tate is being seen as this 6 red zone targets in 3 games. So for me in the receiving game, it's really just Tyler Boyd. Tate seems somewhat interesting, but I doubt I get there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see myself getting to him at that price either. And I'm really, not too enamored with like a full out Cincinnati onslaught. I'm not sure that's necessary here, but I do really like Tyler Boyd. Mixon is interesting, at least. The Ravens, it's not just the secondary that struggled. Their run defense has been gashed by a few teams. Nick Chubb went off. Cleveland rushed for 193 yards. Kansas City rushed for 140. And then they've very, very much been up and down. Like against Arizona and Miami, they held them to nothing on the ground. Pittsburgh, 77 yards. But there have just been complete breakdowns on that line and their ability to stop the run. It's interesting to see how up and down they've been through the first 5 weeks.
Yeah, I think so. I have that noted here is I think this Ravens run defense is better than you see the stats show. And exactly what you said, it's been up and down. They gave up a decent amount of yards to Kansas City. Darrell Williams ends up having a good game there, but breaking into it, in that game, Darrell Williams had 75% of his yards on 1 carry. But then Nick Chubb just goes absolutely just dynamite off of them. But a big thing there was the Browns came out and really schemed that way. They just went 12 personnel and dominated the front for the Ravens. So, it's an up and down defense. I think it leans better or more good to bad. And also when you take into account just 12-point underdogs here coming in, it's just not a spot that I want to get to mix in. He played a season-high snaps, 63% last week, but it could very much be a closer to get Giovanni Bernard on the field a little bit more in what sets up as a pass-heavy script.
What do you think of the Baltimore Ravens offense here? Mark Andrews, Marcus Brown, Chris Spags yesterday on the strategy show. We do a beyond the numbers thing, and one of the stats that he had is that Mark Andrews and Marcus Brown are both receiving right under 8 targets per game. And Mark Andrews ran more routes than Brown with 27. The Browns 22 for the first time since week 1. He did that last week with one of the highest total matchups on the slate against Cincinnati's poor pass defense. Which is more playable? I'm reading literally right off of what Spags wrote yesterday because I think it's still viable to get a second opinion on it. And do you like a Lamar Jackson, Brown, Andrews stack here against a beat up bad Cincinnati defense?
Yeah, I think I do. And I think it's something that I get just small exposure to. But Mark Andrews didn't practice yesterday with a shoulder injury. He's been doing that, though, so I expect him to play, but just monitor Thursday and Friday reports. But Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews, both these guys are leaving just a ton of air yards on the field. I mean, we saw week 1, Hollywood Brown go off. Mark Andrews has done well. But if you look at it over the last 3 weeks, each of them is just not connecting on big plays. Hollywood Brown 2 weeks ago probably should have had a touchdown. So I think you're getting just price discounts on both of them. Now I kind of like just going to Hollywood Brown as a one-off more so than anything else. Lamar's a little bit down my player pool in terms of quarterback interests and a pretty stacked tight end position this week. So I think they're all in play as a lower exposure, lower owned stack. Hollywood Brown would be the one that I get to the most. He's similar in a category for me in terms of how he's grading out as Will Fuller before last week, as Mike Evans before his week 3 performance, as guys who are having a ton of opportunities, looks, and just deep targets, and everything looks good. Their price stays the same because they don't connect on them, and then it eventually comes through. So the last 3 or 4 weeks have been that way for Hollywood.
Do you have any interest in Mark Ingram?
This is really interesting. So here's my stance on Mark Ingram. I thought he was going to be owned, and he's not owned right now. But the reason that you like playing Mark Ingram is, okay, he saw a season high in snaps last week, and he also is just going to have a lot of touchdown upside where he's a 12-point favorite. But I started weighing the options of he's right there next to Leonard Fournette, next to Le'Veon Bell. And if you're telling me that the passing game work right now for Fournette is over 6 fantasy points per game and Le'Veon Bell is over 6, that's probably canceling out the upside that you get from Mark Ingram in terms of rushing upside and touchdowns, really, is what you're playing him for. So it's tough for me to get there when you sandwich between Bell and Fournette. The ownership's going to Bell and Fournette right now, so maybe I shift a little bit. It's a solid matchup at home as a 12-point favorite. But I think that's the biggest thing for me is just I think I just prefer the passing game roles much more than relying on touchdowns.
So do I. And I think when it comes to this, it's all relative to who's priced around him.
Yeah.
And I don't see a way that I can prioritize Ingram. As a matter of fact, I crunched 1,000 lineups this morning just to see what we would get. I had these guys capped at a certain point, but when I filtered them, I came up with I think 5% Mark Ingram. So that's not a lot at all compared to many of the other running backs. And I think I'd probably be all right with something like that. I just don't know how I can make him a top priority, and that's what it comes down to. Let's talk about Cleveland and Seattle. Seattle Seahawks opened as road dogs here. I think, we actually saw that begin to move a little bit, but Seattle's a better team, man. Russell Wilson's having an MVP caliber season, and the defense, while they're not the Legion of Boom anymore, they're still at least respectful enough to make life tough on opposing offenses, especially a struggling one like Baker Mayfield, where the line hasn't done him many favors either. That has swung now. The Seahawks are 1.5-point favorites on the road, and you have a 46-point total. Neither team has a particularly high implied total, but Seahawks 23.8, Browns 22.3. What do you make of the road team Seattle here?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of plays here or people that are at least in play. I'll start with Chris Carson. I mean, he's just way too cheap, coming off a season high in snaps at 84%, even with Rashad Penny returning last week on Thursday Night Football. You get the mini buy a little bit. So the snap count for him, a guy who on this slate is averaging the third most rushing attempts on the ground, 18.8. He has 3.4 targets per game, and he has 13 red zone attempts. So that's top 3 on the slate as well. It's just so much volume for a guy who is only $6,000. And we talked about Mark Ingram earlier. You're seeing double the amount of passing game work for Chris Carson. And he's probably had a little bit less than he should, just based on the fact that he probably got benched for about a quarter and a half or so a few weeks back for the fumbling issues. So, yeah, I like Chris Carson at that price point. I think some of the ownership is following it. Russell Wilson's in a weird spot price-wise for me. He's sandwiched between 2 guys that I really like this week, or really 3 guys. But he's been probably the best quarterback in football right now in terms of real life. I mean, he's number 1 in fantasy points per attempt for fantasy in terms of DraftKings scoring, so maybe even there. He's third on the slate in rushing attempts, 5.4. So you know what you get in Russell Wilson. I think he's a fair price point if you want to get there. And stacks here, probably not somewhere that I go all that much. So that's probably why I don't get to him. But Tyler Lockett, a guy who might go a little bit unnoticed, only 7 targets per game, a little less than people would like to see. But among these 6K receivers, I think he gets hidden a little bit. But he's primarily going to face Eric Murray in the slot, who has a 58 grade on Pro Football Focus. So it's a very good matchup for Lockett. I think I prefer Carson than Lockett in this game from Seattle.
Yeah, Carson's someone that I found myself getting a decent amount of early on. It's when it comes to like full out stacking this game, I don't have a ton of interest in it, but I think Wilson's always going to be in play. For me though, it's probably one-offs of Lockett and particularly Carson. I mean, when you look at Carson's production this season, even with those fumbles, he has really been making a huge impact on the ground. And let me pull it up. I tweeted this out yesterday. Just, the few players that have at least 20 plus, that have 20 plus total looks, averaging 20 plus total looks this season. And look, despite all of those issues that we've seen, with the fumbling, thinking that, maybe it would be Penny. Even CJ Prosise started getting additional looks in that game where against the Saints. He ranks, let's see, 1, 2, 3. He ranks 5th in total looks this season, 21.8 per game. He's behind McCaffrey, Bell, Fournette, and Dalvin Cook. So if you're just talking from a volume perspective, Chris Carson's getting a lot of it, especially in games with favorable game scripts, which we've seen against Arizona. We saw against the Rams. He has 49 total carries and 6 targets over his last 2 games. That is very encouraging.
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly think that his passing game work, if he stays on the field that much, is going to only come up from his average of like 3.5 targets per game so far.
The other side of this game, I think Nick Chubb is someone we need to talk about because his price it's getting up there for sure. When you're comparing him to a few of these other guys, he's $700 more on DraftKings than Leonard Fournette. He's $900 more than Le'Veon Bell. He's $1,300 more than Chris Carson. The very simple question here is, does Chris Carson or does Nick Chubb does he deserve this price point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, relative to other players, the way that they're priced, I would actually probably say no. It's not like it's an egregious price point on him, but I'm going to get to other players. I mean, we even mentioned Carson. We're going to get to some other guys that are just a lot cheaper than him. It's nothing against him. We saw even in a bad matchup where his team gets down a ton, he still did well in prime time. And I think that's why you're getting a little bit of a boost in his ownership here. But yeah, it's just hard for me to get to him. And I think the Seattle run defense is actually good. We saw early on last week, it gets slashed up a little bit by Todd Gurley, stabilized in the second half, but they're currently ranked, last time I checked, unless it updated, but 4th on Pro Football Focus. And I mean, the front for them is going to be names that people recognize. I mean, you have KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner, Quinn and Jefferson. Poona Ford has been fantastic against the run. It's about 5 or 6 stout guys up front to defend the run. And I think the only way you get a little bit more, I would say, interest in Nick Chubb is if you think they go back to what they did against the Ravens, who in coming into that week were seen as a good running team, run block team, or run defense team. And you get more 12 personnel, which I don't think you're going to see. So Nick Chubb, yeah, the price point's probably a little bit higher than I'd like to pay for it. And just relative to the slate, I'm probably not going to get there that much. And I think the matchup is just tough.
I think you can do better. Now, maybe things will change if David Johnson doesn't play, but I still don't think that'll be the case. I also don't think David Johnson's going to play.
Yeah. Oh, you don't think he's going to play? Yeah, I saw he didn't practice yesterday. So none of the sentiment has been good. If that's the case, I mean, what is it? It's Chase Edmonds everywhere week.
Yeah. Oh, he'll be the highest owned player for sure.
Yeah, he probably should
on
be.
the slate. There's no question in my mind. He'll be the highest owned player on the slate against Atlanta. I have no doubts about that. Initially running, of course, things are always subject to change. They will change, but running these crunches, I was getting a decent amount of Browns receivers, Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham. It's certainly been a tough go for them in terms of consistency. We haven't seen it. The only way they could get Odell Beckham involved was throwing passes and getting rushing attempts last week. I mean, he caught 2 of 6 targets. It was horrible, just really tough to watch. And Jarvis Landry has been very productive over his last 2 games. But Seattle's run defense definitely better than their pass defense. Do you see any merit to looking at a $5,200 Landry or a $6,800 Beckham, who we know, despite all of the problems this season, is still one of the highest upside and most talented receivers out there?
Yeah, I mean, this price tag on Beckham is just so appealing, but it's a tough matchup. He's going to be going up against Griffin, who's kind of breaking out through 5 games and towards the end of last year is a really good shutdown cornerback. He ranks right now top 15 in Pro Football Focus cornerback coverage. He'll primarily be on Odell, if I had to guess. And yeah, this offense is just set up so terribly right now. The offensive line is not anything that's going to help them in terms of getting time for deep plays to Odell. The price tag is so cheap, though, and we know what this guy can do in terms of a ceiling if he gets just one zone coverage against him and they hit him with a slant or anything really in terms of time for Baker to Odell. So there's going to be some exposure that I get to in like 20 maxes. And if I end up playing 150 this weekend, I think I'm going to set up some groups for that. But definitely because of the price tag is too cheap. And I think Landry's in an interesting spot. Like, he's had 2 back-to-back very beneficial matchups, and he's been able to take advantage of them, even in a really bad overall game for his offense last week. He has a huge first half, and then the team does nothing in the second half. But this matchup is also pretty beneficial from the slot. It's a matchup that has allowed a lot of floor games to receivers in terms of 14 fantasy points or around there for Juju and Tyler Boyd. And then we saw Cooper Kupp just dominate them last week, as he's been doing nonstop this year. But I think the matchup for Landry is the spot that I like the most for the Browns. And then Odell, just because of the pricing play and knowing what his ceiling is, I think I get some there, but no crazy exposure to this game at all, really.
Okay. Yeah, I do have some interest in Odell Beckham. It's really just based on his skill. But
Yep.
yeah, I think there's also, you have to keep in mind as well that there are other receivers in very good spots. It's just to me that Beckham, even again with these concerns, shouldn't be this cheap. He shouldn't be, you know, he's too good, and that's really all it comes down to. Sometimes I'm willing to bet on talent, and in a spot like this, I could see this game, believe it or not, being a shootout. I wouldn't be surprised. It's 1.5 point spread. Seattle's favored very slightly on the road. Cleveland at home after a brutal loss in San Francisco. I think it's very possible that this offense looks a lot better than they did in week 5, because although they are not as good as people expected, they are better than they were last week. So that's how I see it. Let's talk about Jacksonville and the New Orleans Saints. Third game here. The over-under on this is 44. And the Jags are actually 1 point favorites at home. 22.5 point implied total, 21.5 for the New Orleans Saints. Michael Thomas, Teddy Bridgewater coming off of tournament winning performances last week, while Alvin Kamara was quite disappointing. But one thing that really stands out about this game, we'll start with the road team. Jacksonville, according to Football Outsiders, ranks 32nd in run defense DVOA this year. 32nd, dead last in the league, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. It's surprising to me as well that they would be that bad. Will we see it balance out a little bit? It's very possible that we do. And whenever you face Christian McCaffrey, it only makes things worse. But Football Outsiders factors in matchup and strength of schedule. They're not just taking yards and yards per carry. Pro Football Focus similarly has them ranked bottom 5. So it is a good bounce back spot for Alvin Kamara on the road in what should be a very competitive game.
Yeah, I agree. I like Kamara, especially at that price tag. We saw what Christian McCaffrey did to them last week. McCoy, some older backs, actually. I mean, Carlos Hyde and McCoy have had good games against this Jacksonville defense. We saw Kamara kind of get factored out of the receiving game last week, as we've seen a couple of times in the past month with Bridgewater. But I expect that was just scheme. I mean, you can attack Tampa Bay downfield, and they're just going to let you have whatever you want in the middle of the field. So I'm not too worried about seeing 20% less routes run for Kamara last week. Yeah, the price tag's nice, I think, and we'll get to him. I think I prefer a guy who's a little bit more expensive, but it's not like I'm not going to have a decent amount of exposure to Kamara. So I do like that. Michael Thomas is in an interesting spot. I have to see Jalen Ramsey, they just said, is expected to practice in limited fashion today. We'll see what he ends up. If Jalen Ramsey's in, you'll have Thomas going into the slot some, but it's just going to be a really tough matchup. If Jalen Ramsey sits out, it's going to flip completely on its head and be a really, really good matchup for Michael Thomas. So I guess it's a wait and see on that. It seems like Ramsey's trending to play.
I'm going to continue to assume Ramsey's out until he plays, because he's been sidelined for some ridiculous shit.
Yeah, that's true.
And I really don't, is it his back? What really is he dealing with? I honestly don't even think Doug Marrone knows at this point. So you're probably right. I mean, it looks like it's trending that he'll play, but I really at this point have no idea if that means anything based on what we've seen over the past couple of weeks since he essentially said that he wanted to be traded. Do you like, is there anything here that you really like from the Saints side? Let me put it to you that way, instead of just saying like, hey, could this guy be in play or him? Is there anything you really like?
Yeah, if Ramsey's out, I'm going to really like Michael Thomas. AJ Boye is obviously a really good cornerback, but he doesn't go to the left side of the field all that much. He'll primarily, by far majority of the game, stay on the right side, and Michael Thomas lines up in the slot or on the left side of the field for about 75% of his routes. So you're going to get Michael Thomas going up against Trey Herndon, who's a cornerback that would be on that side of the field where Thomas is, and it's just going to be an absolute mismatch in terms of the skill set. 11 targets per game for Thomas is second on the slate. So it's a complete flip on his head. If Ramsey's out, my interest in Thomas is one of the top end price-wise wide receivers completely shoots up. If Ramsey's in, best cornerback in the league when healthy, it just drops, and I probably don't have that much exposure.
All right. Yeah, it makes a massive difference. I guess the question would be, though, do you think even if Ramsey's in, I don't see him shadowing Thomas, do you?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't see a full-on shadow just because Ramsey rarely goes into the slot, and I think Thomas will probably run a decent amount of his routes from there.
But it would still make things, it would definitely put a damper on the matchup for sure.
Yeah, you probably have Ramsey like 50% of the game and on 50 to like 2/3 of the game on Michael Thomas.
I have recently labeled Leonard Fournette the poor man's Christian McCaffrey. You may say, why? Well, let me tell you why. First of all, He's third in total touches per game, 23 per game, behind only McCaffrey and Le'Veon Bell, who's played 4 games, not 5. Only 4 running backs are averaging at least 15 carries and 5 targets per game. Christian McCaffrey's one of them at 21 and 8 with 29 total looks. Leonard Fournette, 19 and 6. So, yeah, not as many targets. He's definitely not as explosive in either phase of the offense. But from a pure workload standpoint, Leonard Fournette can be relied upon every week to get, upwards of 20 carries and 5+ targets. That's good to know when you're paying, a mid $6K price point for a running back. The question is, can he do something with this matchup?
Yeah, that's definitely the question. And it's the whole volume trumps efficiency thing. So I think he can do something with it, but then you factor in the ownership. And that was one of the spots that surprised me at how highly owned he is. He's going to continue to just grade out really well because you're getting so much volume, and he's right now still, even after scoring last week, due to regress in terms of touchdowns, 1 after 5 weeks. So his projections are going to continue to pop, especially with the receiving game role. Like you said, I really like the comparison as a poor man's Christian McCaffrey, not as elusive in space, but he's getting the exact same amount of usage right now. The most routes run, like you were saying, as a running back. So it's a really good spot for him. The ownership is what's giving me pause. I thought he would come in like mid-teens, and just seeing that spike all the way up close to the 30% mark is maybe not a concern, but it just makes me start to think about other spots a little more that are close. So yeah, I think Fournette is completely fine. Yeah, 19 carries per game right now is second best in the slate, only slightly behind Derrick Henry. His passing game role is fantastic, and it's similar to the Mark Ingram thing. He's priced right, or what we were talking about earlier. He's priced right next to Mark Ingram, and he's averaging 7 fantasy points per game in the receiving spot, where Mark Ingram is averaging barely over 1. So it's just a huge difference for me. And we know Fournette has a lot of red zone upside once he gets there.
All right. I am on the same page as you. Now, DJ Shark could have a tough time here. Marshawn Lattimore, I think, is better than he looked through the first few weeks. Mm-hmm. All you need is a matchup with Mike Evans to make life easier for you because, man, he has owned Mike Evans over the past couple of years. I think Evans might have had 1 game, but outside of that, he's shut him down to the point where Evans and him got in a fight. That was where Jameis Winston came up and, flicked the dude's ear.
Yeah.
What an image. It's crazy. But what do you think of Westbrook and Shark in this passing game?
Yeah, this is one of the spots that I really like the ownership I saw. So starting with Westbrook, this is one of my favorite plays when I factor in ownership for really any format. So, I mean, you're getting PJ Williams, and it's not just like we're beating a dead horse here in terms of him being bad and we're sticking to that anchor theory of something from last year. He's been bad this year. Stills week 1 in the slot, 337-1. Cup goes over for over 100 and a touchdown. Lockett goes for over 150 and a touchdown. And then Godwin last week, 2 touchdowns over 125, all primarily guarded by PJ Williams. So D.D. Westbrook, maybe not the same size as many of those guys outside of a Tyler Lockett, but it's just a fantastic spot for that price tag and the ownership. Really like Westbrook. And then this is the deciding factor is DJ Shark. If I get to more DJ Shark, I'm just going to have full-on team stacks of Jacksonville.
Right.
Because I do think Minshew has some upside. He has a floor with his running game on the ground at least. And the secondary is a little bit suspect compared to their run defense. So Shark, last week he had only part of the game James Bradbury on him. I thought it would be a shadow. It wasn't. So Bradbury, though, when he guarded him, he caught about all 3 targets for about 65 yards, had a really nice contested catch against Bradbury. And he looked fantastic last week as he has all year. He went in the slot 26% of the time. Lattimore has done 3 shadows this year against Hopkins, Amari, and Evans. He shut down Amari and Evans. He didn't shut down Hopkins, but that's pretty much what skewed his whole year. He got torched left and right by Hopkins. And from there on, it looks like Lattimore's been bad. But for 4 straight weeks, he's been pretty solid. If I had to guess, I think this is a shadow matchup. We'll see, I guess. I just don't know who else they really want to put him on in terms of Lattimore for this game. So if I'm going to say it's a shadow matchup, I get a little bit less interest in Shark. But what Shark has is speed and size. The only other guy that has been shadowed this year who has speed and size is Hopkins. Amari has the speed, no size. Then you have Evans with the size, no speed. So if you want to take it that route, I do like DJ Shark.
Yeah, I think this could be one of the games where Westbrook puts up some solid numbers. And, DJ Shark has been the guy this season. There's no question. Minshew clearly favors him. But you're still getting, Westbrook. From a snap count standpoint, they're playing very similar snaps. Shark has played 4 more snaps than D.D. Westbrook this season. So I'm really not ultra concerned about that. If you're looking at routes run, first of all, DJ Shark has been hands down the better receiver. He's getting open more. He's running crisper route. Like if you actually watch him, there's no doubt in my mind that Shark deserves to be getting this type of workload. But D.D. Westbrook's even run more routes than him on the year. So that doesn't matter unless you're getting targeted, but the opportunities are there for him to get targeted. And they have the exact same amount of targets on the season at 37. So I do think that Westbrook definitely makes for a low key option here where Shark will obviously be the one that's more popular. And the thing is, they're very similar in price, which should mean, let me pull up. I have ownership right here. I'm very curious. What do you think Westbrook compared to Shark ownership would look like this week without taking a look?
Yeah, I haven't taken a look. I know what Westbrook's ownership is, but I haven't looked at the difference. I would say it's like a third of the ownership.
Yep, right around that. 10% DJ Shark and Westbrook 3%. I think you'll see that gap grow even wider, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially with the similar price points. But in terms of opportunities, they have literally the same opportunities this season.
Yep, and now you get Westbrook in just a better matchup.
Yep. Kansas City and Houston. Highest total game on the slate. You have to like this. I don't feel great about the Mahomes injury, but I think if he's on the field, he'll be good enough, and we shouldn't have to worry too much about it. 54.5 over under. It's 3.5 points higher than the next closest total. That's in Arizona. But look, you have a 29.3 implied total for Kansas City, 25.3 for the Texans, which is still one of the higher marks on this slate, right? It's still like top 5 on the slate. So you have to like that. And the Chiefs are 4-point favorites at home. I said this to you Tuesday. I said this to Spags yesterday. There's a lot that I want to target here. We can get to Hyde. We can get to Duke Johnson, Sammy Watkins if he plays, and a lot more. But if Bill O'Brien was smart, he would try and take a page out of Frank Reich's playbook and say, you know what? Let's at least attempt to run the hell out of the ball. The Chiefs just lost another player on the defensive line. Like, they're 31st in run defense, DVOA. They've been carved up for yards, 5.5 yards per carry. Like, if there was ever a way to keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands, there is a recipe for this. There is a solution to that if they can execute.
Yeah. This Chiefs team on both sides of the ball is just coming in probably the most injured team right now. So just looking at Houston's offense first, you mentioned it. Defensive line, they lost Xavier Williams to IR with a high ankle sprain. Chris Jones, another defensive lineman, came out last week. No real updates on his status. I'd just say questionable tentatively right now for this weekend. So potentially 2 defensive linemen gone. Yeah, we saw last week the offensive line for Houston finally played better. No sacks for Deshaun Watson. It's just a matter of where you think the game script goes. Vegas has them as underdogs, but there's no telling, or there's no doubt about it. This Kansas City just run stop is terrible for 2 years straight now. Dating back to last year, worst in the league, second worst in the league this year. So Carlos Hyde, I would say, has to be in play, at least for GPPs to an extent. But I'm still going to be favoring the passing game here. Deshaun Watson, I really like the spot for him. He's second in touchdown efficiency. So even though he's had a terrible offensive line and missed some big plays, he's still been highly efficient, highly effective. And in his career, when he's coming in as an underdog, he has just insane splits. It's like 5 fantasy points higher per game. And this Chiefs secondary is going to seem like they're like a middle of the pack defense, but they're really not at all. Their cornerback play is so bad. They've been skewed through a 5-game sample because they got Gardner Minshew in mop-up duty where he looked okay in garbage time. And then Brissett in a game last week, like you said, was completely schemed around the run in short, quick passes. So when they face a quarterback like Watson who will attack downfield with these receivers, I think this is just like the total says, a really beneficial spot for the passing game. And really, it can go either way. Like you said, if it jumps out to a different type of game script, the run game will also be in a beneficial spot.
Yeah, and that's the one spot where I think you and I see it a little bit differently. I like Carlos Hyde here because I think the opportunity for him to get a ton of touches will be there. Mm-hmm. This game can flip on its head. That's one concerning thing whenever you're facing the Chiefs. That's my one concern, is that it can get out of hand quickly, right? If Mahomes gets 2 deep balls on consecutive drives and they're up 14-0 the 5 minutes into the first quarter, like we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen this season. That concerns me. But it's also very possible that Houston is capable of keeping pace here, and they do a lot of that on the ground. So I think Carlos Hyde does stand out to me as somebody that, especially, what's interesting too is I think if Chase Edmonds is the chalk, I'm going to have a ton of him. There's no question. But I will look to get some Carlos Hyde because his ownership should fall through the floor in the event that happens. He's averaging 15 carries a game. Over his last 2 games, he's seen on the season, 10, 20, 10, 12, 21. And, last game they used it to run the clock out. And then against Jacksonville in a game that was a very neutral game script, he had 20. So the one thing I think, Sal, for Hyde is that the game script can't get away from him or it'll be a big disaster.
Yeah, that's the point right there is like, this is going to be, especially with these injuries to the defensive line, and we just saw Mac gashing them last week, this is going to be a very beneficial spot. And if it is a game script that is neutral to positive for Houston, you probably see Hyde out there for 65, upwards of 70% of the snaps, and he's getting all the goal line work. The only other spot, and I guess like both receivers are obviously in play if you're stacking, but I think this is the DeAndre Hopkins week. His price tag is just too cheap. He's the guy I like the most right now. If Jalen Ramsey misses, it'll be close with Michael Thomas. But we saw last week, literally in the fourth quarter, just double teams disappeared because Fuller was just lighting up the secondary last week. So I like Hopkins here. You have to imagine that they can't press as much double coverage towards him because they don't have a single cornerback who can one-on-one man coverage Will Fuller. It's just not there. So putting so much pressure on that cornerback during the game with Will Fuller, you might see what you saw last week. So I doubt you get as much double coverage for Hopkins. Based on where they line up on the field, you're probably going to see Hopkins get a lot of Bashaud Breeland, who's just a journeyman cornerback at this point, currently ranks 125th in coverage. And I would imagine that leaves you with Ward on Fuller, which is also a beneficial matchup for Fuller. But I do think Hopkins is probably like $400 or $500 too cheap. And as of right now, I did sort of like just a test 20 max crunch earlier, and he was the top end wide receiver that I got the most of.
How much do you like Deshaun Watson?
So relative to just the other quarterbacks, mainly because of price, he's probably coming in right now for me. I would say second here.
Okay, is Matt Ryan first?
So yeah, right now I have, and it's so close. It's almost equal exposures to these 3 guys, but it is Matt Ryan, Deshaun Watson, and then it's like 2A, 2B with Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray.
Okay. What about the Kansas City side? Patrick Mahomes is questionable, but he practiced fully, so I think we can expect him to play. Sammy Watkins is questionable, didn't practice on Wednesday, and then Tyreek Hill is questionable, practiced on a limited capacity. So let me just point this out too, Sal, and I think it's very important. If Hill and Watkins both miss, that means I like Carlos Hyde a lot more. Duke Johnson as well, but anything that makes this game less lopsided in terms of the Kansas City's ability to blow a hole in it makes me like him more. Talk to me about all of these question marks surrounding the Kansas City Chiefs offense right now.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start on the line. They lost Andrew Wiley, one of their better offensive linemen. He's going to be having a high ankle sprain, so I imagine that leans more towards doubtful than questionable. So that doesn't help with Patrick Mahomes being a little gimpy. But yeah, it's the spot here is really the receiving game and the passing game for me. Mahomes is probably just a little bit too expensive for me to get a ton of exposure to this week, but obviously it's a great game environment. So I will have some shares. It's really the wide receivers, like you said, that it comes down to. And we don't have too much information right now. Tyreek Hill practiced in a limited fashion. Sammy Watkins did not practice on Wednesday. And Andy Reid said he's optimistic that Tyreek can practice in a full capacity this week. And if you get that, you're getting a way too cheap Tyreek Hill at 6,900 in a very beneficial matchup. So if Tyreek's playing and then you don't get Sammy playing and you have all the other wide receivers out there, it's a lot of interest in Tyreek Hill. It's a lot of interest in Mecole Hardman, who will take on primary slot responsibilities. It's just really all up in the air with these top 2 wide receivers on probably the best offense in the league. Just really right now, question marks. Travis Kelce, the price tag hasn't changed all that much. He still remains just the best usage tight end in the league, number 1 in air yards, getting a ton of targets still. But it is a little bit interesting to me that DraftKings is being very stingy on his price point in terms of not bumping it down, but they bumped down really all the other playmakers on the Chiefs offense after a couple of poor games. So I probably don't have the most exposure to Kelce this week. And it's really going to depend on what happens with these wide receivers. Because if they're both out, like you said, yeah, a lot of the other pieces of the Houston game become more live, like the running game. And then you have just dirt cheap wide receivers who are going to fill in Byron Pringle. And then you still have Robinson being cheap. And there's a lot of upside there at their price tags.
The one concern I have too is like, just because somebody practices in full doesn't even mean they'll play. I forget who it was last week. Practiced in full on Friday and then was out.
I don't know if it was Kenny Stills. I know Kenny Stills, something happened like late with him, but
was it Stills? It might have been. I think it was a night game.
Rashad Higgins practiced in full on a
That,
Saturday, then didn't
yes,
play.
yes,
Yeah,
that was it. And he was a surprise inactive. So
I saw
I,
that.
I really don't, I don't know. But in the event that that Tyreek Hill plays, I agree with you. My guess right now, let's give our takes on this, just our quick guesses. My guess is Mahomes definitely plays. I don't even think that's a guess. That's just gonna happen. I think Hill plays. My concern is, will he be limited? I think you might see a limited Tyreek Hill, and I don't think Sammy Watkins plays. What about you?
Yeah, I would say I agree on all those, especially because Tyreek's injury it's a shoulder injury, which stings for a wide receiver a little bit, but it's not a lower body. It's not a hammy, anything like that can linger. Whereas Sammy Watkins is dealing with a hamstring injury.
All right. Anything else for Kansas City? Anything in the run game?
No, I just don't have much interest. I thought it was interesting that McCoy, I mean, he fumbles. I don't know if there was anything to do with why he only saw 22% of the snaps last week, but there was a pretty clear divide there. Be interesting to track that moving forward, but no interest in playing these guys this week.
Miami, Washington. Here's the barn burner of the week. This should be on every channel on national television. Just a phenomenal football game. There's really nothing redeeming about either of these teams outside of the fact that in football, it doesn't matter if you're bad as a unit. You're very capable of still putting up decent numbers. The Redskins are 3.5-point road favorites, which says a lot about how putrid this Dolphins team is. 41-point over under. Redskins 22.3 implied total, 18.8 for the Dolphins. I will say this, you and I talked about it on Tuesday, and I thought Colt McCoy was going to be at the helm, but Case Keenum's going to start right now. And I say this all the time, subject to change. Ownership will change throughout the week. That's what's great about it. We can adjust. Terry McLaurin's ownership is coming in about 2% on DraftKings. I know that he's expensive, relatively speaking, but if he's going to be that overlooked, if he's going to have zero ownership whatsoever, or 2% to be exact, against a Miami team that ranks dead last in pass defense DVOA, and they've been terrible. A team that in coverage ranks dead last. According to Pro Football Focus, they have a 37 rating. It's horrible. They're dead last in pass rush. They are, you ready for this? Fourth worst in tackling. Just go across the board here, Sal. It is a terrible, terrible defensive unit. I actually don't think McLaurin's overpriced, but the field clearly does.
Yeah, I don't think he's overpriced, and I like it more because of the ownership you were just saying. Look, it's interesting to see what he'll have as a matchup, but I don't think it's going to be shadow treatment from Xavier Howard.
I don't either.
Yeah, I think Xavier Howard's only shadowed 2 times this year, just against Josh Gordon and Amari Cooper. And I think it's rightfully so that he shadows those guys. And what you're getting here, though, is Terry McLaurin, who, if you don't get a shadow matchup with Howard primarily lines up, I believe, on the right side of the field. Terry McLaurin primarily lines up on the left side of the field.
Yeah,
so
55% on the left side of the field for McLaurin and 53% on the right side for Xavier Howard.
Yeah, so you're not going to see them facing each other all that much if it's not a shadow. And like I said, I don't expect it to be a shadow here. You're going to make it. It's going to seem like Xavier Howard's been bad this year, but he's only played in 3 games because of the bye, and all of his production was pretty much given up to Amari Cooper in that game. 90 yards and 2 touchdowns out of the 162 and 2 touchdowns he's given up. So he hasn't been as bad as it seems. But yeah, you probably don't get him on him. So I think it's an interesting spot for Terry McLaurin. He's like one of 2 guys that I have somewhat interest in, and especially in like a big milli maker type slate. Maybe you don't have to go to it in single entries, but if you're trying to bank a milli maker at 2% for a guy who we've already seen sort of these higher end median and ceiling games out of, it's pretty nice. And he has already 42% of the team's air yards.
I mean, I'm talking about having 8% or something, 7%, and you'd still be 3 times above the field, which I definitely like.
Yeah, now he gets his quarterback back more than likely that he had all that success with early on in the first couple of weeks.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I like. He's just been very consistent, man. He's been remarkably consistent, and I can get on board with that. But yeah, you're not playing him in cash, single entry, none of that. Like you said, it's not necessary. But if you're trying to get away from some of the very popular plays, I don't think McLaurin's crazy. And you know what? McLaurin's put up numbers in very difficult matchups already this season. Like Against Chicago, he had 6 for 70 and a touchdown, and they have not made life easy on opposing wideouts. So I still think he can do it, and he has the speed to get downfield and create some distance between him and the defender. What are your thoughts on the rest of this Skins team? Do you have any interest in Peterson and Chris Thompson in a game where they're amazingly favored by 3.5 points?
Yeah, so I think like slight interest in, we were talking about it Tuesday, getting a little bit more on, especially from what you were saying, Adrian Peterson, but I don't know if I still don't think I want to get there in GPPs as much. Like Miami's run defense has been bad. It's bottom 10, but it's right there at 10 in terms of bottom 10 in the league. The reasons why you're seeing Miami's run defense pop up in just all these ESPN things, wherever you're seeing it, is because they're giving up a lot of yardage. But in terms of like neutralized situations, it's not as bad. It's just teams are getting up on them and running 35 times a game. So there's going to be big yardage to come with that, even if the teams aren't as effective. So Adrian Peterson, yeah, it's a spot where if you can project him and think he sees around 15 carries, it's definitely beneficial at the price point. And it's finally a spot that you do get a sense that they can run the ball more effectively. And when you get the head coach saying he wants to come in here and just pound the rock against this defense, that also has to, whatever you weight coach speak there as, make you a little bit more excited in it. That said, though, I probably don't have him in a tournament exposures. Maybe if I play 150 max, but not in 20 maxes. And then in cash, I think is where he becomes a little bit more interesting because if he gets you 10 points, he's not killing your lineup and he's allowing you to get up to a lot other plays. But no real interest in Chris Thompson in this game script. And then there's nothing else that stands out here.
Okay. Yeah. Miami side of the ball, guys like Preston Williams, you and I have kind of talked about him a lot this season. That there's things to like about him. There are reasons to not hate Devontae Parker, getting a lot of opportunities downfield, which is encouraging. And then Kenyan Drake, I'm not excited by any means when it comes to Kenyan Drake. I guess if there was one redeeming quality with Drake, they play from behind so often that he's at least seeing a decent amount of targets. And 14 looks his last game, 18 the game before that, 12, then only 7. But like he has had some games where he's very, very involved. The question is, can they get any traction? Can they get moving on the ground or through the air? And do you have anything from Miami that's worth targeting? And while you're talking about it, there were a lot of people in YouTube chat yesterday saying, like Rosen is the play because he's too cheap. Personally, I don't see myself getting there. I just see it. I think it's very tough to think that, Rosen Dolphin stacks are going to win tournaments. And there are also some cheap quarterbacks that I'll probably get to. But what about yourself?
Yeah, the whole Rosen thing, I put him as a maybe like when I just looked at the slate, but then seeing the team total and just the game environment in general, it's a good matchup, but team total looks terrible. And yeah, you said it, like you have Gardner Minshew and Kirk Cousins for a little bit more, especially Minshew really like that a lot more than Josh Rosen. So not going to get there. Preston Williams, we've talked about him on Tuesday. We've talked about him for a couple of weeks now. So many air yards that haven't been capitalized on that usually leads to a lower price tag than you actually deserve. So I like Preston Williams. Once again, he's probably the cheapest that I go at wide receiver and feel confident that he can have a tournament winning score. And then Kenyan Drake, you touched on. He's a talented player, but they're just not playing him enough. Like he's playing under 60% of the snaps this year. I don't know if that's just to get Kalen Ballage on the field a little bit. Even Mark Walton's played a little bit, third string running back there. This is an okay matchup against Washington, not the greatest, but yeah, where he gets his due is 5 targets per game in the receiving game. And they just don't stack the box against this Miami team because they don't have to. He's facing 7% 5-man boxes on the year or 8-man boxes on the year. So there's nice things there, but the overall opportunity, you have a lot of other running backs we've talked about, the Carlos Hydes, AP as well, that are in the same price range, potentially even later in the week of Chase Edmonds. So Kenyan Drake, I'm probably not going to end up getting to it. I took him out of a player pool earlier today.
All right. Want to move on to Philly, Minnesota?
Let's do it.
All right. So I was pretty surprised to see, like, I know Minnesota quality defense for sure. This game is in Minnesota, but I was surprised to see that the total in this game was as low as it is, 44 points. Eagles have a 20.5 total. They're 3-point dogs on the road, 23.5 for Minnesota. It's really not that appealing, but I think the biggest subject here is, can Dalvin Cook get the ball moving on the ground? Because in the event that he can't, you may see Cousins have to start looking more to Thielen and Diggs, but Mike Zimmer clearly wants to run the ball as much as humanly possible, and I think he's going to do so whether it works or it doesn't. That isn't to say that Cousins won't throw 30 times, but I just don't see a way in which he throws a lot more than that. And of course, the Eagles have a low total. I think it's too low, personally, even though Deshaun Jackson's out. But here you have it, man. Like, is Dalvin Cook going to get the job done on the ground against an Eagles team that has been spectacular at containing the run, holding every team they faced to under 90 yards this season, averaging only 63 yards per game on the ground for opposing run units?
Yeah, so Dalvin, that's the biggest question mark here is they're going to try and force this run. But I mean, just the context of the slate, even if like the ownerships were the same on these guys, I still like a guy we'll talk about later, Ezekiel Elliott, more in the same price range. I'm very close to liking Alvin Kamara a little bit more because of this matchup. And look, don't get me wrong, he's shown an ability to be game flow independent, almost 5 targets per game now, getting 18 touches on the ground, like a huge role here, and we know that out of him. It's just an issue when it comes to the matchup. And we saw 2 weeks ago with the Bears, he still had a good game, but in terms of paying off an 8,000 plus price tag, you need to do a little bit better than an okay game or a good game. And I think there's other running backs in a better spot there. So I think I'm a little bit higher on the receiving game. That's not to say I'm going to have 0% Dalvin Cook. He's surely in a player pool, but I think I'll have more exposure to Zeke and Kamara around him.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that being the case. For me, actually, I might not have much Dalvin Cook at all. Will he be involved in the passing game? Sure. Has he put up solid numbers against very good teams already? A couple of them, maybe, one against Chicago, and that was just because he scored and had 6 receptions, but he only had 35 yards on the ground. Can they spring him loose? It's possible, man. It's very possible, and they're going to use that line to try and clear the holes for him. But Dalvin Cook, to me, at that price, is not going to be one of my preferred players. What about Thielen and Cooks, and what about Kirk Cousins at a discount?
Yeah, I like Cousins here. I think, and this is like going to depend a lot on how my stacks come out, but if I end up getting to more DJ Shark from that other game, I'll have a lot of Minshew, so it'll kind of reduce what I'm getting to Cousins naturally. But it's a good spot. If you think he throws 35 plus times in the way that the Eagles defense has been playing, although they haven't faced a Dalvin Cook, if they keep playing like that, and stopping the run, then he's going to be forced to throw 35 plus times. I probably lean to get the most just one-offs of Adam Thielen here. The guy, he has 50%. I had to check this like 3 times. 50% of the air yards on this team right now.
Which, crazy.
Usually if you see like in the 40s, you're like, wow, that's high. He has 50% of the air yards. So, I mean, he's the guy that I get to the most here. There's nothing against Stephon Diggs. He's had like 5 catches called back by penalty. I think the most in the league right now for Diggs. So both of them are fine. If you want to get to full stacks, I'll probably have some exposure to it. It might be like my 5th or 6th highest team stack overall. And then there's pieces to run it back with as a game stack. But Thielen's one who's getting just by far the most opportunity from Cousins. So in the event that you see Cousins only throw his average like 26, 28 times per game, I still think you see Thielen getting there more times than Diggs.
It is crazy to think that, Thielen has a 25% market share of targets, which is actually low when you consider Cousins' passing volume is so minimal. But averaging 6 targets per game this season, and Stephon Diggs averaging 4.6. I really would like to see that increase. Yeah. I think this could be the game that it happens. But again, it all comes down to whether or not they will resort to more passing in the event that the run game isn't working. And again, if Carson Wentz moves the football and scores, then you're going to have to see them resort to the pass a little bit more. But if this is a 10-7 game at halftime, you're just going to see them keep going to Dalvin Cook because it has worked. Now, on the Philly side, I don't have a ton of interest here. I think Ertz is always viable, but there are a few tight ends I like a lot more. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, it's mainly Ertz. Like, he's coming in with ownership, but there's so many tight ends getting ownership. Like, he's still the 5th highest owned tight end, or only the 5th highest owned tight end. So at that point, you're just saying that everybody's going to have ownership on them. So which one do you personally like the most in their spot? Minnesota has struggled against good tight ends. Evan Ingram had a floor game. Waller had a ceiling game, and Austin Hooper had closer to a ceiling game against them. So I do like Ertz here. No real interest in Wentz. And looking into Alshon Jeffrey, obviously I know he was injured, maybe playing a little bit banged up still. But, I mean, you would probably know this more as a Eagles guy. Is he just not being targeted downfield? Because, like, from what I'm seeing is definitely red zone targets, but just nothing down the field.
Yeah, no, not a lot down the field at all. That was kind of what we wanted, or that was what was hoped for when we signed Deshaun Jackson. But he's been injured, and I've seen some Aguilar targets downfield, some Mac Hollins targets downfield. Not a lot for Jeffrey. Now, he is featured pretty heavily in the red zone, which helps, but this could be one of those games where the Eagles don't see a ton of red zone trips. So, yeah, pretty much a spot where I'm not really all that excited about it. But yeah, by the way, Alshon Jeffrey has 6 red zone targets this season, which is pretty solid. He and Ertz have pretty much dominated that as far as targets go, not to running backs. But let's move on to Arizona and Atlanta. Very intriguing game. Second highest total of any team playing in week 6 altogether, not just on the slate. 51 over under. Falcons 2.5 point road favorites and 26.8 implied total, 24.3 for Arizona. I will tell you this much. Both sides of this game, I am likely going to have a good amount of. My only concern with Kyler Murray is that, how much do I pair him with David Johnson or Chase Edmonds, depending on if Johnson is active or not, because Christian Kirk likely isn't going to play. And then that means that Fitzgerald is really the only reliable receiver among this group of, Keyshawn Johnson. And if Demir Byrd plays, Andy Isabella, I mean, none of Pharaoh Cooper, none of these guys are guys that really inspire much confidence in you, which makes it tougher to get to Murray than it does to Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. And even with Matt Ryan, like on that Atlanta side, it's a fantastic spot for him. I like him. I'm just worried a little bit because there's so many pieces that you can get to. Like there's 5 guys probably around there, 4 or 5 guys that you can put into stacks with Atlanta. And we've been seeing those guys contribute week in and week out. So it's a little bit concerning from that regard in terms of you have to have a pretty big group pool unless you just want to exclude players and hope they don't have a Mohamed Sanu touchdown game, whatever it might be like last week. So I do like Matt Ryan. I mean, averaging 44 attempts per game is tied with Jared Goff for the highest on the slate. Arizona's giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks right now. And the offensive line worries have been more so impacting the running game than Matt Ryan. They've been able to hold up for the most part for Matt Ryan, facing some pressure, but not as much as you would expect. So I do like Matt Ryan. It's just a matter of how I get exposures kind of shifted in there because Hooper's in play, Julio, Ridley, and then Sanu to an extent is also being targeted the most he has in his career through this many games.
Okay. So who are your favorite options from the Atlanta side?
Yeah, so from the Atlanta side, I think my favorite options for this game are going to be Austin Hooper and Julio in terms of just pairing 2 players in a team stack. And that's the worry there is because I still think Ridley's in a fine spot. He'll probably face Kevin Peterson. Sanu will be in the best spot possible against Jermaine Brock in the slot, but there's just not as much big play upside there. So I do have concerns like we were talking on Tuesday with Julio double teams. He's been getting them. He'll likely face Byron Murphy, who has not been that great, but then you get the double teams over the top. And Ridley, although had a good week last week, it was nothing to scare defensive coordinators into saying, okay, we have to shadow some more coverage to the middle of the field. So that's the concern there. So it's a spot that seems like very obvious because of the total and so many options. It's just a little bit right now for me, hard working through the guys I trust the most, but probably Hooper and Julio.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, will I have some Sanu and Ridley? Probably. And I don't want to pair him with Ryan, but I mentioned this to you. We're not on we disagree on this one. I think Devonta Freeman is somewhat viable just based on, I think this is one of these games where the opportunities are certainly going to be there. And hell, I wouldn't even be surprised if Freeman has the big game here and Matt Ryan disappoints a little bit. Granted, I'm going to have a lot of Matt Ryan. I think it's a phenomenal spot, but yeah, Freeman in a very interesting spot could finally be the game where we start to see some quality numbers from him on the ground. What about Arizona? Top plays here. And like I said, I'm almost certain that if David Johnson's out, no, I am certain if David Johnson's out, Chase Edmonds will be the highest owned player across the board.
Yeah, so the Arizona side, I'll start with Johnson then. Look, it's just a really good spot overall. Like Atlanta being better, quote unquote, better against pass catching running backs, giving up the 3rd fewest catches and receptions to running backs so far this year. Not something we're used to, but it's a bit skewed. Week 1, Kirk Cousins only threw 10 passes, if you remember in that game. Week 2, they had the Eagles who weren't trying to utilize running backs in the receiving game at all at that point until Deshaun Jackson gets hurt. And their wide receivers go down a little bit. We had last week where it was a Carlos Hyde game script instead of Duke Johnson. They faced Derrick Henry week 4. Like they haven't faced guys who are workhorses who will catch the ball. So it's extremely skewed right now. Like the guy who's caught the ball the most against them is like Naeem Hines. He's like the best pass catching guy against them. So David Johnson is obviously just a workhorse back who's going to catch the ball, seen a ton of targets this year, running a lot of routes. So if he's healthy, yeah, I like David Johnson the most from probably this game overall and from this team. And then if he's not healthy, the guy who fills in for him, Chase Edmonds, at that price tag, there's nobody after him on the totem pole. You have to start to have an argument around like you just 90+% Chase Edmonds this week and just go all in on it. But David Johnson or his fill-in, whatever it might be, I think is in the best spot for this game. And then, I like Kyler Murray right now. I think he's listed as my quarterback 3. We have yet to see the air and the ground game come alive. We got the closest to it last week. Atlanta's allowing the second most points to quarterbacks on this slate in terms of DraftKings points. Murray's throwing 40 times per game and averaging over 40 rushing yards per game. So it's a good spot, especially when you consider it seems like Christian Kirk's trending back. Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk definitely would be in groups for me. And if Kirk is going to be fully healthy in this one, I think I lean Kirk over Fitzgerald, just bigger play upside in my opinion.
All right. I do, like I said, with Murray, I want to like him more, but pairing him, the decision to pair him with certain players could get kind of ugly. Yeah. 3 to go here. Oh, and by the way, awesemo.com/join is where you can get 50% off your first month of all access premium content. Just use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word. You get the ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool, all of our premium NBA content that we're going to be rolling out very shortly, and so much more. All of our premium articles, the lineup builder, and Fantasy Cruncher add-on, if you wanted to check that out as well. At awesemo.com/join, you can see all of the plans and videos on all of our tools so you know exactly what you're getting and you're not just jumping in head first and opening your wallet for something that you're not familiar with or aren't sure you'll like. We want to make sure that if you do sign up and if you do become a subscriber, that you know what you're getting. There's also a weekly pass, $3.95 a week. You can check that out as well with a lot of cool tools and features if you're trying to, keep it to a minimum in terms of what you're paying for subscription. So we've got something for everyone at awesemo.com. Just go to awesemo.com/join and use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word. All right. Rams, San Francisco. Let's talk about the LA Rams first, because Brandon Cooks is questionable with that concussion. It feels like the 50th concussion he's suffered in like the past month. Really, no, the past couple of years. But this game has a 50.5 total. This, honestly, I'm very shocked by it. I'm surprised by this. It seems like we haven't caught up to the San Francisco 49ers yet. I'm not saying they're world beaters. I don't think this is a juggernaut. But 3.5-point dogs on the road, that's fine. Like, I'm fine with that. But the 50.5 total to me is what's a little bit surprising. Rams have a 27 implied total, 23.5 for San Francisco. It seems like the Rams are getting a whole lot of love here. And this isn't to say that, Cooper Kupp isn't always a fantastic play, but more so to say that I don't think this San Francisco defense is getting the respect that they deserve.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I'll start on the Rams side then. Yeah, the San Fran defense in the secondary has been really stout, and like their slot cornerback has been maybe their only issue this year, not giving up any ceiling games. It's really been touchdown dependent for teams having good games throughout the slot against them. But Kwan Williams over the last 2 games took over the slot and has been a little bit better there. So definitely an upgrade. So you're going to have Cooper Kupp in that matchup. I still think it's a nice spot for Kupp. I don't think the price tags come up to what it probably should be, just based on the fact that he's averaging almost 13 targets per game, still running out of the slot, and Jared Goff's eyes are just locked on him. So Kupp probably has the most beneficial matchup against his secondary. But again, like all of the spots in terms of cornerbacks and safeties on the secondary are pretty solid. So I probably get to Kupp the most 6 red zone targets so far this year. Yeah, you mentioned it, Brandon Cooks. He's in the concussion protocol. He did, I think, I don't think he practiced yesterday. It might have been limited, but either way, he's still in the protocol. He's not yet cleared it to play.
He was limited.
Yeah, he was limited. All right, so Todd Gurley also didn't practice yesterday. Encouraging to see him play a ton of snaps, 93% last Thursday night. Also encouraging to see the price tag cheap. So I have like slight interest there. It's just other guys around him that we still have yet to get to. I like a lot more, and so does the ownership following it. It's a tough matchup for Robert Woods. Richard Sherman has been really good this year so far. On 124 coverage snaps for Sherman, he's allowed 12 catches, 124 yards, and a touchdown. So what that breaks down to per game is 3 catches for 31 yards. Like, he has a couple of interceptions, a pick 6. He's looked really good. I'm not really too high on Robert Woods this week. And then, we have to wait and see on Brandon Cooks. If he does play, he would play Emmanuel Mosley, who's only allowed 3 catches for 24 yards this year throughout about a 2-game sample. So it's actually a tough matchup for the Rams. I'm not high on them outside of Cooper Kupp. Gerald Everett, he's cheap enough to want to get to him, especially if Cooks is out. But outside of that, it's probably just going to be Kupp ownership for me.
That's where I'm at too. Yeah, Kupp would be the one guy. Gerald Everett's looked very good. outside of a couple mistakes he's made. Just athleticism and being able to get yards after the catch has been impressive in a couple of spots, particularly last week. But he's not like minimum salary or anything, so it doesn't even make a lot of sense to get there. San Francisco, clearly Shanahan wants to run the football. A pretty amazing stat that I pulled up yesterday. Get this, man. With San Francisco, there is one receiver on the entire year that has had a game with more than 5 targets. One. And just to compound that, there is only one that has 5 targets in a game. Richie James doesn't have 5 targets in a game. Kendrick Bourne doesn't have more than 3. Dante Pettis has 1 game with 5. Marcus Goodwin doesn't have more than 4. And Deebo Samuel had 7 in week 2. Outside of that, he doesn't have more than 4. I mean, other than George Kittle, there isn't a single player that you can have even remote faith in to see a decent target share at all.
Yeah, so yeah, you said it. Like right now, it's like Deebo Samuel, the only guy getting any target share. So like what San Fran is doing.
Even with that though, it's been 3, then 7, then 4, and then 3. Like he still is underwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like what Shanahan and San Fran are doing right now is terrible for like fantasy rotations and stuff like that. But it's pretty genius in terms of he knows he has so much talent. He's just running out 5 receivers, 3 running backs every game and getting all the mismatches, and they're undefeated and the defense is good. So it's working. It's not going to stop. And then, the only consistent there is George Kittle. So he's the only guy I have interest in. A slight interest in Tevin Coleman because of the price point. You're getting a discount based on what you saw.
I like Coleman here too.
Yeah, you're getting a discount because the pricing came out before that game, I believe, or it's a spot where you weren't expecting as much Tevin Coleman to be used, and then he goes off for the most carries, and he has a really good game. So he's in that range of do you like Hyde, do you like Duke Johnson, and Adrian Peterson. I think he ranks somewhere around like 2 for me in terms of those 4 that I would like. So slight interest in Coleman, but it's mainly George Kittle here. I think he's getting the most ownership at tight end, which was something I was hoping he wouldn't get, but all the tight ends are pretty much those top 5 guys are all getting 15 plus ownership. So I think it's fine. I think he's $800 too cheap. And so far this year, I mean, he's had a bye. He got pulled in the 4th quarter of week 2. Week 1, he had 2 touchdowns called back. So he finally gets in the end zone on prime time, and it seems like it spiked his ownership.
I think Coleman is just cheap enough where if he was any more expensive than this, it'd be tough to get to him. Of course, the Chase Edmonds, David Johnson news will play a big role. But even though Breida was clearly the talk of the town last week, Coleman saw 16 carries in his first game back. He was out a month and came back with 16 carries. So I like that. I'll tell you what I don't like, Sal. I don't like this Denver-Tennessee game. There's not a lot about this game that stands out to me. It has the lowest total on the slate, tied with Washington and Miami at 41. Titans with a sub-20 implied total, 21.8 for the Broncos, 2.5-point favorites. So if anything, it should be competitive. But I can't prioritize Derrick Henry at his price point. Lindsey might be fine, but Royce Freeman, outsnapped him last week and is getting more work than I would prefer. Sutton and Sanders, sure, I think you could make an argument for either of them at their salaries. But just in total, and then with Corey Davis and A.J. Brown, there's just not enough targets there. There's not enough work in this passing game, Delaney Walker included. Pretty ugly game in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree. So on the Tennessee side, no interest in Derrick Henry for me. Look, Denver's run defense, it's going to be completely skewed through the first couple of games because one guy in Fournette goes off against them, 225. Yep. And in that game, they lose Bradley Chubb. In that game, they have Derek Wolfe out, who's not one of their best run stoppers, but he's probably middle of the pack, a big body in the middle of the defensive line. But the big reason why that was impactful was Draymond Jones filled in for them, who's by far one of the worst tackling players in the entire league, a 23 grade on Pro Football Focus in tackling. So it doesn't surprise me that Leonard Fournette had a huge game. But you take away that game, they're only averaging 3.3 yards per carry to running backs. We know he's very one-dimensional, Derrick Henry. You'll probably still see 25 touches, but it's just not a spot that I want to get there. Just a note to watch moving forward. A.J. Brown saw his highest snaps by far in that last game. And if he continues to see that or trend upward, he's a legitimate wide receiver 2/3 because he's built like Julio Jones. It's just a matter of can he get on the field. But from the Tennessee side, in terms of playing in DFS this week, no interest.
Okay, me neither. And then the last game that we get to here before we wrap it up. By the way, if you enjoy the show and you want to help support us, hit that thumbs up button, like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well. It allows us to help putting out free content each and every day. We love doing it, and all of the support is appreciated. So we thank you. But do you have Ezekiel Elliott? I'll let you run with this because we got to get out of here. But Ezekiel Elliott against the New York Jets, you said you alluded to it. You teased it a couple times already that this is one of the guys that you really like this week at the top priced, a top tier of running backs.
Oh yeah, both running backs in this game. Zeke's in just a fantastic spot. Like when I saw the ownership being single digit on him, hopefully it stays there. I'm going to get a lot of Zeke. It's just right now you have CJ Mosley expected not to play. You have Henry Anderson, who's probably by far their best run stop player on the defensive line. He's already going to be out with an AC joint sprain suffered last week. So that's two of their 4 or 5 best run stopping players out. And now you get Ezekiel Elliott playing 95% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. He's over a touchdown favorite. This is not a game script where it's a 2 or 3 point favorite last week, so the Packers took control. Like, people are disappointed in what Zeke's doing, but week 1 he gets pulled early. Against Miami, he gets pulled early and goes off. In a Saints game where they completely stop him on the ground, still gets in the end zone, 6 catches. And then you can't blame him last week, 14 touches, over 90 yards and a touchdown, where his team's down 2 to 4 scores all game. So just the fact that he's going to be in a fantastic spot, I have him somewhere around 22, 23 touches. And 2 of the 5 best run stop players on this Jets team are going to be out. And yeah, I like the spot a ton for Zeke, and the ownership's in single digits. So I prefer him over Kamara, and I prefer him over Dalvin Cook by a wide margin right now. And I'm going to try and prioritize him if indeed these guys get ruled out.
So you have him over Kamara by a wide margin, you say?
Wide margin over Dalvin Cook. Kamara, it's probably going to come out decent. It would probably be like a double-digit exposure difference.
Okay, fair enough. Any interest in this passing game for the Dallas Cowboys, knowing that Amari Cooper, I think he's going to play. He should play. Yeah. Gallup has returned, and he had a pretty decent game in his return. Actually, he's having a great season. Honestly, he's been phenomenal. Do you like anything from the passing game against the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, this game in general is just so many good plays, in my opinion. So Michael Gallup right now, he's one of the most underpriced players on the slate, in my opinion. I tweeted about it. He'll play Darrell Roberts, who has given up 23 catches, 241 yards, and 3 touchdowns this year. So on the guys that he's defended, Darrell Roberts has given up an average of 17.3 fantasy points per game. Gallup comes in right now as a top 6 player on the slate in terms of targets per game, 19.7, just a really good spot. And then we know what Amari's been doing this year. He'll face Tremaine Johnson, who's giving up an 83% completion percentage, which is just insane. So like getting so much interest in Zeke, getting so much interest in Gallup, and then just having natural interest in Amari in this matchup, it's making me get more Dak than I expected. And I'm kind of okay with it now that Sam Darnold's back, because there's an opportunity there that this game can stay close enough so that they have to pass, but probably more so than not Zeke one-offs and Gallup one-offs from Dallas.
Yeah, I think Gallup is somebody that will probably go overlooked. Right now, ownership is not coming in that high on him against a bad Jets team. 3%. Very interesting to me, especially if Amari Cooper is in some limited capacity due to being a bit hobbled here. But I think we'll get more insight on that later on in the week. On the Jets side, I tweeted this today. Just something for if you're seasonal football players and you're looking for a little bit of edge going forward and you're looking to make a trade. Check this out, Sal. So Le'Veon Bell has to face the Cowboys and then the Patriots. Listen to this 8-game stretch he has after that. At Jags, bottom run defense. At Dolphins, versus Giants. At Redskins, versus Raiders. At Bengals, versus Dolphins. At Ravens.
Wow. Yeah,
crazy.
I'm gonna have to make some texts after this game.
I mean, dude, I'll tell you, that is one of the, when you talk about an 8-game stretch going into the fantasy playoffs, you can't ask for something better than that. So
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And like his usage is insane. And that's with a terrible quarterback not keeping drives alive. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, definitely, I don't know how you don't have interest in Bell on this slate, even if the ownership comes up. 8 targets per game. He leads the slate in terms of opportunities. 25.75 right now per game is the most out of any running back. And he's priced at $6,400, I believe. Yeah, it's just he's $1,000 too cheap. Maybe that's too few or too small, especially with Darnold back. They didn't know Darnold was going to be back, but now you have more red zone opportunities, more sustained drives. He only has 2 red zone rushing attempts because, I mean, he's had Luke Falk for the majority of the season, so it's tough to get there. Dallas has looked bad against just skilled running backs. Saquon week 1, limited touches, goes for $140. We had Aaron Jones, $180 last week. And then Kamara, not a great game, but he has 90 total yards. So when they have a versatile running back, they've struggled. Yeah, Le'Veon Bell might be just the best running back play on the slate, just based on where his price point is. And ownership's following it, but you should not fade a bad player in a good spot because he's owned, especially when he's cheap.
Don't fade a good player in a bad spot. You mean.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Do not fade a good player in a good spot, especially when he's cheap.
Yeah, and this spot, like you said, it's not even that bad. So I don't know how I get away from it. Initially, my ownership or my exposure to Bell was pretty high. Last week, I really tried to stay away from him because of the matchup, because of the quarterback. But Sal, he might not. I said this to Spags yesterday. He's not, Peyton Manning in his prime, but getting Sam Darnold back over a guy like Luke Falk is a huge improvement.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you were watching just Luke Falk play, there was a couple of plays where receivers just did not help him out in terms of dropping balls. Demaryius Thomas had a deep one drop, but overall, it was just nothing threatening downfield, and it was just not a lot of pocket awareness, if at all anything. He looked very timid in the pocket.
The only concern is, can that line be any better than last week where the Eagles got 10 sacks on them? I guess we'll find out. All right, that'll do it for us. Thanks, as always, for hanging out with us. This was the NFL Strategy Show, game-by-game breakdown. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Manny Laura, Chris Randone with lineup construction. Take a look at Fantasy Cruncher too, but you don't need to be an MME player in order to get something out of that show. And then Sal will be back with you on Saturday with Chris Brandone for your final tune-up heading into the Sunday Week 6 slate. Sal, final words. Where can they find you when you're not doing Awesemo shows?
Yeah, so no other final words right now. We'll save it for Saturday's show with Chris. But you can find me at Twitter at SalBetcherDFS.
I see how it is, bro.
What did I say?
You'll say the good stuff for Saturday with Chris. I got you. Okay.
Right. No, I just don't have anything else right now. Yeah, I just have nothing else right now. But yeah, just Twitter at SalBetcherDFS, and I have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe there at SalBetchery. But that's it for me.
All right. That'll do it for us. Appreciate you hanging out. We'll see you back here next time on the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.